All right, well, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you've had an extra coffee like I just had. So we're joined by Chris Wixom from Corning. We've worked together on several projects and basically want to look at some of the things that we've learned as a group and working together when it comes to not just installing DAS or not just considering DAS. There's obviously, as you've heard from some other groups this morning, there's many more things that are happening inside properties and buildings, especially in some place like New York City at this venue. Let's start with
So the first thing is, what's happening in the market? What are things to consider as we look at the dynamics of three particular things? First of all, in-building is about connectivity. It's about more than just cellular, it's Wi-Fi, it's LAN connectivity and other types of things. But more and more people aren't thinking about how they're connected, they just know that they're connected. So we see that kind of blending.
Right. And of course, there's more things that you're being approached about, right? So versus, cellular coverage is certainly important to everybody, but depending on the type of facility, type of building, Wi-Fi is important, or public safety is important, or monitoring the heat, turning the lights on and off. All those sort of things can be controlled wirelessly. I think it's a large segment that is potentially overlooked by us as a group when we look at a property and say, oh, we just need to think about DAS, we just need to think about DAS. There's probably 20 other opportunities that you're overlooking when you are just so focused on that one vertical, that one option.
And then the second thing, and in this room we all know this, but an 8x increase in bandwidth demands by 2020. 2020 is not that far along. So how do you plan for this bandwidth increase now? Because in many times if we're building a building now, it may not be ready until 2018, 2019. So how do I plan for that now?
Right, and as, we've heard even this morning with the financial gentleman speaking this morning, technology disruption is happening now. There's more and more control mechanisms, there's more and more 5G, what's 6G gonna be, is there 10G 20 years from now? If you're installing different solutions in a building multiple times over and over, multiple passive upgrade, it's just not an efficient or cost-effective solution.
Yeah, you certainly don't want to be in a situation where you're going to have to rip and replace something because what you're putting in today didn't take into account 5G, or you weren't ready for unlicensed spectrum, or you weren't ready for T-Mobile, who just purchased 600 megahertz spectrum. There's just so much change going on, and because of the disruptors, that might be Corning that provides a solution 3-4 years ago. It may not. It may be a Cisco. It may be an Ericsson. It may be somebody else. So with all this disruption.
So, so one of the things that we've seen is, as the word that I think is possibly overused, but we certainly hear it from a lot of our clients, is when we're doing discovery of what their needs are can you make it future-proof? That's an extremely loaded question. I'm certain that we all get it all the time. I can make it future-proof as far as my mind can see, maybe, but I still don't know what's going to happen, right? And so as much flexibility as you can build into a system or build into an architecture, the better off you are.
Yeah, and I guess that's right. The flexibility is absolutely key. And then if at the same time I can gain some efficiencies with the system that I put in, all the better. And this gets to be tricky, and we'll be talking a lot about this during our talk, but how do I put in a system that supports any IP-related device? Doesn't matter what it is.
Right, so, and again, it's anything wireless. What does it need to be, right? So, we already mentioned not doing rip and replace. So can you expand on something? One of our current clients we're looking at buying 5 existing venues that already have DAS in them. So part of our assistance with their due diligence is not just what's there today, but then if they purchase these 5 venues that exist, what upgrades are they going to have to do? What capital are they going to have to invest in the short term? Or are things actually installed there that had some long-term vision?
And we were talking about this before our talk now, but if 60% of the costs are putting in and pulling the cable, and this is even more, probably a greater number in New York City where you've got union labor. If a majority of the costs are pulling the cables and putting them in and installing them, then put in a system where you can make your adjustments at the edge, either out at the remote sites or in your head end. But put in an infrastructure that basically the middle stays for 30 years.
Right. So basically, so what are we talking about when we talk about convergence? It's communication plus. So again, I think that as an industry, we focus, not that the carriers aren't important, I certainly don't mean that, but we focus so much on the carriers, we forget the other options, we forget the other technological advancements that we could work with or that we could help advance. So communication plus is convergence, all right? So voice, data, intelligent building controls, Wi-Fi, so many other things. And if you can build them into a single network, if you can build them into a single build, then you're saving yourself literally millions of dollars. So in a typical high-rise in New York, right? So in order to lease the property, whether it's for business or for condos, you need to have good cellular service. Otherwise, the $1 million penthouse on top of the 80-story building is worthless because the guy's going to show up and he's only going to have his cell phone and there's so much interference up there, it's ridiculous. He's going to expect that Wi-Fi is going to work. There's all sorts of heating and cooling controls that can be layered in. There's some medical companies that we work with that will use certain converged products just for medical installations because then they layer in all sorts of software controls for even silly things like, I shouldn't say silly things, but RFIDs on medical packets and how many they gave out that day and to which patient. All those sort of things can be controlled and monitored wirelessly. So, and there's a lot of people, I think, in the industry that look at things and say that telecommunication and converged services are really like technology is the fourth utility for an intelligent building. So if you're going to spend millions and millions of dollars on a building, then it should have a representative infrastructure that's expandable.
So if we're talking about a converged build, what does it look like? This is a great diagram, I think, in a simplistic way of taking a look at what it means. And what are you really providing? You're providing fiber up the riser with a composite fiber in the horizontal. And that composite fiber has multiple strands in it. So you have the flexibility to put whatever you want at the edge, whether it be your DirecTV or TV systems, your security, your building automation, your cellular, your Wi-Fi. It all connects to this edge device, and that's where you can make your changes out at the edge. And then in the head end, right now you've got your cellular providing your signal source, you've got your distribution switches and your routers and those types of things. And then talk about the flexibility for the future. That's rapidly changing to be software-defined networking with white boxes where you can put any application you want in there. And for that matter, we've talked a couple of speeches today about your CRAN architecture and going to a virtualized signal source where you're taking that signal source and moving it away. So we see the flexibility on both sides, but this is kind of an easy way to look at it and think about it.
Right. Well, and mentioning the CRAN architecture, I think that the building owners, hopefully in the room, realize that, if New York City is $1,000 a square foot or more, I'm sure, then not having to use access in your IDF closets or not having to put, full BTS in some basement or on some rooftop and build an extra platform, all those sort of things are distinct advantages when you're trying to leverage your building space and make as much profit as you can from that asset. So I think that when in-building engineers look at something and their bosses say, well, how come it can't be like cell sites? Every single cell site is going to have the same azimuths and the same antennas and the same power. Then our excuse as engineers is, well, every building's different. Every customer is different, right? So if you take that approach and you say that every build you do is not one-dimensional, right? It's not this one-dimensional item that everything's going to be the same. Then you should look at that property in multiple dimensions and say, Mr. Customer, hey, I know you want us to bring the carriers here for you. What does your current Wi-Fi system look like? They may have one. As an engineer, I should be telling them, hey, look, What's your growth opportunity for your Wi-Fi system? When's the last time you looked at it? When they installed it? How do you measure it? Is it any good? When's the last time you looked at your public safety network, or was it just when you got your certificate of occupancy to get in the building, and now perhaps like you've expanded or changed and maybe you don't even pass at this point? So there's all those sort of opportunities, as well as all the control mechanisms that can be built in. So the main point for consideration is that if you can consolidate the tasks and services into a converged solution, you can save huge money. You save building space and you save installation time. Again, to Chris's point, if 60% of the costs are wrapped up in labor, if you're only doing the build once, you're saving over 3, 4, 5x every single time you're having to put in these repetitive systems for other items, just by having a flexible fiber architecture. And it doesn't necessarily have to be fiber. It could be a Cat5 solution, a Cat6 solution, where, you know, can you leverage existing conduit? What's already in the building that you can take advantage of? But one of the most important things that we see from a design perspective or a client engagement perspective is truly understanding the opportunity that's presented initially, but then exactly what is that building used for? And exactly where do they think that building's gonna go? Is it commercial today and they're gonna turn it into condos? I mean, all those sorts of things are relative when you're looking at what the engineering solution should be. And then can you expand on that? Can you give them something better that they maybe haven't thought of? And so it sounds silly, we mentioned it earlier, but so I happen to think that, you know, it's sort of like, instead of being siloed and imagining that your businesses are, you know, Main Street USA with the hardware store and the pharmacy and so on down the street, those are all single source solutions. If you can bring everything together and you become the one-stop shop Walmart, if you will, of what their wireless services can be, you can bring everything to them in one shot. And you've given them this cohesive, comprehensive sort of plan for their architecture. So I get an interesting stat from Cisco. So 60% of total mobile data traffic offload was put on the fixed network through Wi-Fi or a femtocell. So 10 exabytes a month. And so that's not just cellular service, that's, you know, all the IoT stuff. Are there enough eggs in my Samsung refrigerator? All those sorts of things are happening over that, and they all end up back on the regular fixed network. But by 2021, that number is going to be almost fivefold.
So this is kind of a fun one. We're wanted to give a couple examples of, okay, what is it that we're talking about? What does it look like? So we're working on the Falcon Stadium right now, and it is a converged network. So everything from the cellular, the Wi-Fi, there's actually 3,000 displays that have 74 channels of high definition TV. That's all over the system. And the nice thing about it is there's real savings in putting a converged solution together, not just from space savings, which we went from 64 IDFs to I think 36, so you know, almost half. We went from cable trays that were very, very full to probably using 10% of what we would normally use, leveraging this composite fiber that we were talking about earlier. And you know, it's pretty exciting from a space savings. From a cost savings, again, there's significant cost savings by putting this all over a single network. And the other thing we haven't talked about is converged networks and the flexibility. In this particular case, we're doing a passive optical network, or a PON, and because of that, we're getting rid of a lot of the Cisco gear in the middle, and you can guarantee bandwidth. So in this particular case, I think it's 40,000 concurrent users that we're guaranteeing 5 megabits of data. So it's pretty cool what you can do, not just from a cost savings and a space savings perspective, but also the performance you get from the system. And then finally, we're adding a bunch of applications on top. So we're doing some instant replay and some other kind of fun things at the stadium. So we're really exciting. There have been some building delays, but we expect to open in August.
Nice. So this is, I thought we pulled this one out, sorry. So another New York example, I think, specific.
Let's go back one, and let me just...
Yeah, cover that.
This example is more of looking at a hospitality environment. So if you can picture the arrows, where the arrows are, normally you would have 3 Cat6 copper pairs, you'd have 1 coax run, and you'd have all of this cabling going into a person's room. And then connecting up to the various systems, whether it be your phone, your TV, or what have you. What we're doing is basically consolidating that all into a fiber pole that then goes to an ONT at the edge, going back to that comment about a passive optical network. And it's hard to picture it, but if you can picture all of that equipment, in Marriott's across the country, a lot of that sits right behind your TV. So it's hidden very, very nicely, and then in some cases, some hoteliers like to put it in the closet up above where you normally, put your clothing. But it all consolidates very nicely into a very small package. And then this one's 220 Central Park South, which is a gorgeous building being built in New York City right now. 70 floors, 110 units plus. And this is a little bit, it's not full convergence. We are doing the wireless connectivity in this building, working on the triple play solution, and then in this particular instance, the other benefit of fiber is being able to provide elevator coverage, which is kind of fun. It's always been kind of a hard thing to solve for. And then we are providing the security services, the cameras and all that kind of stuff over the fiber-based infrastructure. But just kind of give you a feeling for different verticals that we're playing in stadiums, hoteliers, and now MDUs.
And the thing, again, so even though this is a new building and there's a lot of control mechanisms, as things evolve and change, then those services can evolve and change. And there can be more things layered on, other things removed easily, and it doesn't become this huge build or this huge interruption. I mean, even if you look at something as simple, I mean, I don't know whether this is a mixed-use building or not, but one of the hardest things to actually coordinate with just a regular business office that's a multi-floor building is access to all those different floors. And can you even just walk through the building, right? So the fewer times you have those interruptions for the customers, the fewer times they have to, disrupt their tenants' lives, the easier and sort of better as a partner you become. So I think the big one on here is it's a converged build, not converged network per se.
Yeah, this is actually a pretty common issue that we have to talk and communicate about. A lot of people are frightened or scared over security concerns, over sharing bandwidth and those types of things. Well, you're really not. All you're sharing is the sheath, the cable, and in there you might have 10 to 24 fibers. It's a very secure network, actually more secure than a parallel system. And what the savings is, instead of pulling all these multiple systems and doing it in parallel, you're pulling the one cable with multiple strands in it. And so you maintain your own bandwidth, you maintain your own security, and it really is a great way to go.
Yeah, and so one of the things we've talked about as well that I don't know that we've really keyed on today is, so if you're going to approach a building or a facility with some sort of a convergence concept, then you actually need to, it sounds simple enough, but you need to get to the right person. Like if you're just solely talking to the IT guy, his responsibility is, has complete blinders on it, and all he's thinking about is, all right, I need this wireless LAN solution. He doesn't, you might mention public safety to him, you might mention bringing all the carriers on the same system. He's oblivious, that's not his responsibility, right? So you have to find someone, frankly, intelligent enough to understand this overarching solution that can bring everything together. And that's not as easy as it might sound.
Yeah, and from an end user perspective, we're seeing more and more popularity and placing fiber deep in the network. So to enable these great things that we've discussed, like Wi-Fi, DAS, all these current technologies that are up in the market. But in addition to this, the most important topic here is that the future-proofing of the network, where millimeter wave technologies down the road can have a path forward with the existing technology that you deploy today. So all these high bandwidth applications really, can leverage the existing infrastructure that today can be deployed. So, that's from an end user perspective, it's something that the customer values. So, yeah.
So, I think that's...
Yeah, and I'd like to just, a couple of other things. It's so critical to start early in the process. So many times we get to customers that want to do this, but can't, because they're too far down in the build process, or they're too far down in the planning process that they can't do it. So it's so critical to, one, have an executive champion. If you don't have an executive champion, you need to have that to drive the various groups together. And this is on both sides. This is on the carrier side and on the customer side. So, it needs to come together in multiple ways. And that's absolutely critical. I think of Texas A&M, that really happened and was driven by the vice chancellor. And without that, it would have never happened. And he really brought the groups together. And so if there's a way too, if you don't have that very strong executive champion, to bring the groups together so that you can optimize on the overall solution as opposed to the piece parts, you're going to have a much better result. But without driving it, it's really not going to happen, because people are just very used to their own piece of the pie, and that's what they're going to focus in on. So I don't know. I think these are absolutely, so we probably do 65% of our business is cellular only. 35% is this converged build with multiple solutions on it. But these are the most critical things that I think drive whether it's a converged build or not.
I tend to look at it, I know there's some fiber companies in the room. If the rest of us in the room are smart enough, then we look at it like the fiber companies do. They build the fiber, and then at the end of the day, they don't really care what gets passed through the fiber. I mean, they certainly want to lease it, and they want to make their monetary value on it, but that's the way you need to look at in-building architecture. So if the fiber exists, what do you want to do with it? Do you want security cameras? Do you want the lights to go on and off? Do you want cellular coverage? What do you want to do at the end of the day? And once that asset is there, then you have complete flexibility, much more so than you do if you're running, miles of coax through a 100-story building. Any questions? I think we're good here. Appreciate your time.
Okay.
Say you use the example of the IT guy, the IT managers, talking about a solution that covers multiple technologies. When you have that instance and the person has no interest in either owning or maintaining those other systems that benefit them, what means do you use to sort of help that along?
Well, from my perspective, I look at it as a...
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, I apologize.
That's okay.
So Frank's saying, so if you speak with the IT guy, let's say, and his focus is solely wireless LAN, and he doesn't care about those other perspectives, what is the solution, or what is our thoughts on how do you get perhaps to the next level, or get him to understand that there's a more holistic option? So from our perspective, we're typically out doing engineering services with PCTEL, right? So if I'm asked to go do, let's say, Wi-Fi and benchmark their existing Wi-Fi system, give them suggestions and do a gap analysis on how to improve that system and so on, we're going to be there anyway. We might measure all the other things at the same time and turn around and say to them, look, you're failing your public safety currently. It's none of my business, but you should be concerned about it. Or I realize you need to lease the rest of this office building, and most of the companies that come in today aren't going to go install all these multiple desk phones and so on, right? Here's what your current coverage looks like from the 4 carriers. Those are sort of the easiest sort of visual options. That or simply boiling it down to the numbers and saying, look, you're going to do this one thing. Here's the other things that you could do with those same dollars, or incrementally more dollars.
Yeah, and that's a good question too. I think a lot of the trick is financial, right? Because if I'm going to put in a system that can handle all these things, it's going to be a little bit more expensive. And so whatever group is responsible for that first part of the build, they're not going to want to do it. So if you can come up with financial ways where that first group that's working on deploying a system in a building benefits from all these other things that can go down the line, then all of a sudden the Wi-Fi guy does care.
Well, and some of it too is, frankly, if I'm talking to the IT guy, like my vocabulary, everything about the way I address the situation is totally different than when I'm talking to a public safety guy or a typical, RF engineering guy. So you change your presentation, if you will.
And the IT guy may favor active Ethernet instead of PON, or there's so many other things to navigate through that you have to really be careful how you phrase things and where the funding comes from at that point.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, well, we're going to take a quick break. We got about 15 minutes, and then we're going to come back for our last two presentations.
Thank you very much.
The countdown is on. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. Well done. Thank you.